Today I want to examine the idea of American prosperity in the eyes of the Latino population. For so many of our Latino friends, they view America as a chance to rewrite the course of history and cement their legacies as one of consequence. But according to my friends over at the Pew Research Center, that dream of a brighter future may be slipping out of the hands of our Latino brothers and sisters. According to available data, while many Latino Americans believe in the American dream, only about half, at 51%, end up achieving it, leaving some to indicate a significant gap between aspiration and reality. Even though many in the Latino population work hard to achieve everything they earn. For my friend, Dr. Paul Rivera, he's a first-generation Latino dedicated to mobilizing resources to marginalized communities, mainly of Black, Brown, and Latino descent. He possesses a diverse background in academia, diplomacy, economics, coaching, and a deep love for his Latino roots. He spends his days helping others redefine Latino masculinity and understanding the effects of people-pleasing and overthinking. He is also active in helping the Latino population preserve and protect their mental health and understanding the effects and the importance of doing so. He's the co-founder of Be Act Change, a dynamic way of turning your most desirable aspiration into reality. And Dr. Rivera joined me this week to have a conversation about the state of Latino quality of life in America, how we can improve it, their mental health, and so much more. I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. Dr. Rivera, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn how you help organizations with their organizational change and attitude, and how you support the Latino population. Great to see you this morning, and thank you so very much for being here.
Sounds good.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Rivera, I know that your work focuses on helping organizations really define their culture and their way forward, my friend, in terms of their strategic planning and everything in between, my friend. So I'm wondering if we could start our conversation by you telling me about your work, Dr. Rivera, and what makes you so fabulous, my friend.
That sounds good. So our company's called Be Act Change. We do everything from the perspective that every individual has a superpower. That's sort of the basis of where we start from. Every individual has a superpower that they bring to every situation. It's your unique way of solving problems. It's your unique way of seeing the world. And it's part of the unique value that you bring to any situation. So that's that's our departure point for everything that we do. So when we work with organizations, for example, and so my background is that I have a long background in academia. I've been a U.S. diplomat. I've worked with governments, with presidents, with heads of ministries, and then in corporate entities, working with teams and large organizations, and then working with nonprofits all around the world. So we've worked in lots of different ways, in lots of different places, at lots of different sort of levels of hierarchy. Everywhere we've gone, everything that we've seen is that every individual brings their superpowers to the table. And so the way in which we go about creating that sort of magic that we call it collective power, but it starts with recognizing that each person has that superpower that they bring to that space, and then having everyone start to recognize it. And it's a really fascinating change that comes around once you are familiar and you understand your superpower, what you bring to the organization, to the situation. It's something that's beyond your title, right? It's beyond what your educational achievement is. It's beyond what your pay grade is. This is who you are. And so it really goes to starting to create a mutual respect, really, and an admiration, where rather than you and I being in competition with each other, what we start to see is you have a superpower, I have a superpower. Let's see how we can bring it together and start to really elevate the organization. And that's the beginning of collective power. So for us, it's really that creating that transition in any situation from the recognition of the superpower to creating the mechanisms where we uplift each other and create that collective power.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, Dr. Rivera, I'm curious to ask you, my friend, what's your definition of purpose-driven impact? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of organizations and a lot of people, actually, that are really in the hustle. They're in the grind, and they're so passionate and so committed to what they do that they sometimes forget or don't even have time to think about, in a lot of ways, what the ultimate end game is. Like, what's the impact that you want to have? What's the legacy that you want to leave? So oftentimes people in organizations don't really think much about their vision, their purpose, their legacy. They just know that this is the work that they need to be doing. And it's really fascinating, because when you don't have that understanding of what's the impact that you want to have in the world and what's the change that you want to see, in the long run, how do you want to be remembered? When that's not in your mind, one of the things that happens is that the world smacks you every now and then. Things happen, there's a lot of things happening in the United States right now that are a shock to everyone, and when you don't have that clarity of what your vision and what your purpose is, it's much easier for those unexpected changes to knock you off your path. It can derail the work that you're doing. It can really make you feel frustrated, like you don't know what to do necessarily. When you do have that vision, that clarity of what's the impact that I want to have long term, how do I want to be remembered, what's the legacy I want to leave, it gives you a kind of resilience, so that when those unexpected changes come, you are still clear on where it is that you want to be going. You might have to get there by a different route. You might have to pursue different means to get there, but you understand still that this is your core. This is the change that you want to create in the world. This is the impact that you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doctor, I'm also curious to ask you about your thoughts on the incoming administration. It's already 3 weeks in, my friend, and they're off to an interesting start, to say the least, my friend. And I know that you're a big presence in the Latino community, my friend. So tell me, what concerns you the most about the new way forward in America, my friend?
Well, I'll tell you that. So my work is in international development and foreign assistance. So today, as we're speaking, the new administration has completely shuttered the U.S. Agency for International Development. And so that's a big part of the work that I did. And then, as you said, I do a lot of work with Black and Brown and immigrant communities as BAC Change within the United States. So almost everything that we do also falls under the umbrella of DEI or DEIA. So as I'm speaking to you today, I actually have had all of my contracts for this entire year looking towards the future completely cut. Everything that I had as prospective income for the next year for myself and my family is completely gone. So, so certainly I would say that a lot of these changes, there's multiple levels of seeing it. A lot of these changes I think are swinging in the wrong direction, right? As I said to you, we believe in our souls that every person has a superpower. Doesn't matter what race, religion, or color you're from, but the reality of the world is that not everyone has the same opportunities to bring their superpowers to light. So to me, that's extremely important. In the reality of creating collective power is that we have to create the opportunities for each individual, regardless of who they are, where they're from, to have their superpowers shine. Right. So that's not a movement that I'm really seeing at all. In fact, I'm seeing a tremendous backlash to that in the world right now, and certainly in the United States.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, please.
No, I was just going to ask about DE&I in general, because it's something that is rather important to me, Dr. Rivera, because I was born with cerebral palsy, and I talk to organizations both on the government level and in the corporate sector about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities. So I'm wondering if we can have a larger discussion on the importance of hiring folks with disabilities and your thoughts on what's going around the DE&I sector as we currently speak in the U.S. government. What are your thoughts there?
So I have a child who's autism spectrum, and as you start to familiarize yourself with a population that not everyone knows about, people who function differently in their day, people who have to take particular physical requirements or particular sort of emotional requirements to get through their day. Not everyone is used to seeing that, and the truth is that on one side, I have a very strong belief that folks who are labeled as disabled, I think, have superpowers that the rest of us don't have, because there's a mental and emotional fortitude that this population has that not all of us have. We take for granted how easy sometimes it is to get through our day, and to undervalue those who have to take those special measures every day is a huge mistake on our part. Right. So not only do I really emotionally fight against the movement to exclude and to minimize the potential contributions of that group of people, but I think that by really finding ways to incorporate those superpowers that the rest of the population doesn't necessarily have in abundance would be tremendous for us. So as I see, the way that things are swinging in our country, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot on so many levels. We're creating division where we need unity. We're excluding superpowers that really we are so desperately needed at this point in our country, in our world. When I work a lot, for example, in populations and in countries like Haiti or like Pakistan, where there's so much conflict and warfare and all of that. And really, as you start to look at it, those countries got to that point because people were systematically excluded from the ability to utilize and show their superpower in a positive way. And so they find other ways to do it. And to me, I see the United States following suit. at this point. We're taking our greatest asset, which is our people and the vast diversity of people that we have, and not allowing them to be the best versions of themselves that they can, which means that we're not allowing them to be the most that they can for our country and our world.
Yeah, and just building on your last answer, I'm curious to ask you, what would be your message to your community at large as we see the U.S. going through so many dramatic policy changes for your Latino community? So what would be your message to the community at large, Doctor? I'm curious to get your answer there.
There's a few levels. One, most importantly, like off the top, like straight up off the top, is to never doubt your value. Never doubt your value. This world needs you. This country needs you, and your superpower is valued and needed. Whether or not some folks try to convince you differently is another issue, but you have to create around yourself that impermeable armor where you understand that you are valued, you are worthwhile, and that your contributions matter. That's one. The second thing is, I think that this is a hard lesson for many folks in our country, and I think it kind of comes down to when a bully makes threats, you have to know that the bully's going to follow through on the threats. So I think that in a lot of ways we need to start creating a mindset where we are less likely to tolerate that kind of behavior. And it's a very difficult one for so many of us who believe so deeply in the importance of dialogue and consensus, and truly diplomatic solutions to global problems. We're seeing that there is a group of people that have come to power who have taken advantage of the rest of us willing to undertake a process, and the fact that that process doesn't necessarily have to be followed all the time. If that makes sense. There's a way of doing things that we're used to in a democratic society. But the rules leave openings for people to go in different directions, and that's what we're seeing right now. Like we can scream a lot about the legality of some of the things that are happening, but the truth is that just about everything that's happening is happening within some measure of the frameworks that are allowed. We've just never seen a group of people so willing to flagrantly violate the intention of why those rules were put in the first place there. So I think we just have to be much more prepared in the future and immediately, to stand up for what we know is correct, to continue voicing what we know is correct. It's one of the reasons why I'm here with you today, because it's important for these voices to continue to be heard, the voices that advocate for positivity, for inclusivity, for diversity, for our superpowers, calling for collective power and collective unity, and knowing that that's the only real way forward for us.
Yeah, and Doctor, I'm curious to give you the floor to tell me anything else you wanted to tell me about change and the pivot that you're making with the changes and the spirit of the organization, and anything else you wanted to share around that topic as well.
Sure. BIAC Change is sort of our love child, really, that came out of working in international settings and working with communities, really, all over the world. And one of the things that we saw, especially in the international development space, was that there was just not enough, what I would say, not enough listening. A lot of times our efforts came in a little bit paternalistic, to not say colonial, but at least paternalistic, where we believed that, a lot of these developing countries and developing communities were in the situations that they found themselves because they didn't have the knowledge or didn't have the ability to to understand their own situations and solutions. So here we came as saviors, right? The truth is the exact opposite of that. People everywhere in the world, they understand what their challenges are. They have an understanding of what the solutions might look like. And just like, we struggle here at home sometimes, they don't always have the means to create the solutions. So the most powerful thing that we did in that arena was really focus on listening, talking to people, having them understand what are their perceptions of their challenges, what are the solutions that they see moving forward. And that's really the spirit that we brought into Be Act Change, right? As we work with groups, as we work with communities, as I said, everything is focused on what's that superpower, what's the common objective that we can all work towards, and how can we bring together our collective powers to make that happen. So we have one sort of section, one arm that works with nonprofits and works with corporate entities, and really we look for corporate entities that are aligned with our message and have some sense of wanting to do good in the world, and that's important to us. And then we have a nonprofit. Actually, we have our own nonprofit where we try to get a lot of this messaging out to youth. So this last December in 2024, we spent the entire month crossing the United States, doing free workshops all across the country, primarily to Black, Latino, and immigrant communities, speaking to our youth and doing vision board workshops. And it's something really, really powerful, because I know that it's a kind of message that I, as a child, and clearly still happens, wasn't given. This idea that you have a superpower, you have the ability to create your life and your legacy according to your superpower, and that you should dream big. One of the things that we talk about a lot, and we still see this experience, especially in a lot of the Latino immigrant households that we work with, is this idea of work hard. They'll recognize your value because you work hard. Just keep your head down and don't make waves, and that sort of thing. And the truth is that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to make waves in order to be recognized, and you have to have your voice heard. And sometimes when you are the most powerful is when you are acting in alignment with what is your core. So it's an interesting message that we bring to a lot of these communities that have never heard that before. A lot of communities are really used to being told that they are substandard, that they're poor and they'll always be poor, and all of that. And it's really important for us to bring a very different message. My wife and I run this together, Esther Celedon and I, and it's really it's impactful. We've been to a lot of communities where they've never seen a husband and wife that are both PhDs before. They've never seen a husband and wife that work together, and they've never seen necessarily people who look like them spreading a message, and not just a message, but a method for life that they've never heard of before. So that's tremendously important for us, and that's sort of in a nutshell the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Rivera, building on that, I'm curious to get your perspective or definition of what it means for an organization to have a strategic vision of purpose, my friend. What do you think that means to you?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is that it's knowing what's the impact that they want to have, right? But then the strategic part is creating the alignment to it. So that's a big piece of it. I've worked on strategic planning for a long time now. And so often the strategic plan is a beautiful document that's at the end of the day crafted by a handful of people within the organization, and then it sits there and it's just sort of this showpiece. So the reality is that it should be something that really reflects the organization. So, for example, one of the things that we do when we engage in strategic planning and strategic visioning with an organization is the first thing that we do is that we interview one-on-one as many individuals within the organization as possible. We've done up to a couple hundred interviews within any organization. And it's extremely, extremely important. It's such rich data that comes out of just those 15 to 30 minutes that you have with the individuals, because the sense of common purpose starts to come out within the folks that are in the organization, the sense of what could be better, the fountain of ideas that any organization is clearly not always taking advantage of, but is always there. It's so powerful. And this is one of the ways that we ensure that when we create this vision, that it is strategic, because it involves the input from as many people as possible, as there's as much superpower as possible that's gone into this, and the beauty of it is what makes it strategic, what makes it a real vision, is that it's something that ends up having widespread buy-in from the entire organization, from the entire community. So it's something that everyone starts to speak that same language in a way when they talk about their organization, what the organization wants to do, how it is that they go about doing it. Everyone's sort of speaking that same language, and it's really, really powerful. It creates a kind of, as I mentioned before, a kind of resilience, so that in tough times, you still know who you are as an individual, as an organization, what you contribute to it. And so that strategic vision of purpose is tremendously important, because everyone knows the end point that they're working towards, right? What's the impact that they're working towards, and how it is that they contribute to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about the Latino population and their connection to the American dream. So I'm curious, because you also talk to people about the fallacy of the American dream, and with your current administration, I'm also curious to ask you if you believe that that's slipping away from the Latino population. And also, I'm wondering if we can redefine Latino masculinity, because I know that's also a big part of your work. So you
Sure.
can take that two-part question in any direction you wish, my friend.
Sure. So, we have a book that's come out. It came out in late 2023. The book's called Creating Your Limitless Life. And then it says, as a subtitle, it has Chasing the American Dream, and it's crossed out. So, one of the premises of our story is that, so the American dream is actually, in concept, this beautiful thing, right? The American dream is that in a land of equal opportunity, your skills, your effort, and your knowledge are all that you need in order to create the success as you define it. Okay, that's not basic. That's literally how the American dream is defined, right? That what's needed is equality of in a space of equality of opportunity, that your energy, your intellect, your ability create the success for you as you define it. Okay, but in application, we see that there's a lot of inconsistency in terms of it. One is we know you can argue all you want about DEIA and whether those initiatives are good or not, but regardless, there is absolutely no denying that not everyone has the same equality of opportunity. For whatever reason, not everyone has that. So already the context for creating the American dream is immediately questionable. The next part, though, is that we forget when we talk about the American dream, we forget that the American dream is about creating success as you define it. What's my success for me? And what's happened instead is that the American dream gets translated into what house do you live in? What kind of car do you have? What kind of job do you have? How much income do you make? And it becomes these measures, these metrics of the American dream become substituted for the dream itself. Okay. And that's really where we get into trouble, because as we start to look at it, for example, Latinos in the United States fall behind. It's a massive economy. If Latinos in the United States were an economy on their own, it'd be something like the 7th largest economy in the world. It's a huge amount of, it's a huge economy on its own, but it doesn't mean that the individuals within it are necessarily making it in a lot of ways. Latinos still lag behind in homeownership. They still lag behind in income. There's a massive income gap and an even more massive wealth gap when compared to other groups. So What does that mean? When we start thinking about the fallacy of the American dream, especially for these Latino and some of these immigrant groups, what we start to see is that it starts to have mental health consequences. We see a higher incidence of suicidal ideation, especially among young Latino men. When you ask them why do you feel so bad that you don't know if you can go on living? And the answer basically comes down to they feel like they're failing their family because they're not reaching the American dream as we've defined it, right? So add to that, then there's this whole other layer that you mentioned about masculinity, and we call it machismo in the Latino community, but having worked all over the world, there's some version of it in almost every society, almost not all, but almost every society, where men are supposed to be strong all the time. They're supposed to be stoic all the time. They're supposed to be impervious to the things that happen to them. And that strength means that they also are supposed to act in a certain way, treat women a certain way. And it's one of those things that's become an incredibly toxic dynamic. Latin America is one of the places that has the highest incidence of gender-based violence against women, intimate partner violence, and it's so many of these manifestations. When you see how all of these things feed into each other and against each other, when we're struggling, and especially in the United States, we're struggling to make it in a lot of ways. We're measuring ourselves against a metric of success that is immediately stacked against us. We are in a machista society where we're not allowed, or we're not rewarded, certainly, for admitting sometimes that mentally we're not okay and that we could use some help, or treating or seeing our spouses as equals or anything like that. We're creating a situation where all we can do is really sort of spiral downward. It's one of the reasons why our advocacy is so much on the individual superpower, but at the same time, you don't do this alone. You have a community. The whole point of collective power is that you have a community to build that resilience, to build that collective power, and understanding that superpower doesn't have a gender, doesn't have a religion, doesn't have a color, doesn't have a particular ability of any kind. It is something that's inherent in each and all of us. And the more that we are able to bring that to get to light for our community, we can speak just about the Latino community, but the more that we can bring that out and create that situation where you can say to your partner, I'm not okay today and I need some help. When you can say that, I have a dream of doing something different. I have a dream of doing something else with my life. All of that is what starts to bring that collective power and really turn around these mental health statistics that we're seeing, really turn around these, things that lead people and our youth to doing things that are not always positive. All of these things start to turn around by creating a very, very different conversation and a different mindset around how it is that we perceive masculinity and how we perceive success.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doctor, I'm also curious to ask you about your definition of inclusive leadership and collaboration when it comes to organizational alignment, because I know that you're also a facilitator that your work focuses on that as well, my friend. So I'm curious to get your definition of organizational alignment and inclusive leadership. How do you think those two things are interconnected?
They're very interconnected. Thank you for that question. One of the things when you talk about inclusive leadership, one of the things that we saw, and I hinted at it a little bit earlier, when we work with organizations, we talk to everyone. Everyone has an opportunity to speak. That's part of being inclusive. And the reason that we do it is because we've seen that sometimes the person who has the best idea, the most impactful idea, is not the leader, is not the manager. We've seen it I have to say that in probably one of our most impactful situations, the person who had the best idea that really turned things around wasn't even someone in the technical position. It was our secretary. The secretary, really was the one who had the idea that really everyone rallied around and brought that change. Had we not created the situation where she felt like she could speak and she could contribute her idea, we would have lost out tremendously on what ended up being a massive success. So when we talk about inclusive leadership, it means, one, leaving your ego at the door, right? There's no space for that there, because you really need to create the space where each person, regardless of who they are or what their position is, feels that they will be heard and valued when they speak. Okay, so that's one piece. The inclusive leadership is that it's really valuing what others bring to the table. And so then the alignment piece goes along with that, because the alignment is basically the action that moves you toward the goal, the objective, the common purpose, right? The most effective way to do that is understanding what are the strengths that are on your team, what are the strengths that they bring, and bringing them into alignment, bringing them into the space where they can exercise their strengths as well as possible. It's one of the things that we've seen a lot, that oftentimes in organizations, people are in the wrong positions. They're hired for a particular position. The organization oftentimes wants them to stick very rigidly to their position description, for lack of a better term. And so the ways in which they're able to use their greatest strengths are sometimes limited or cut off a little bit. So one of the things that we definitely work on as part of the implementation plan, after we've done the strategic visioning and then we're moving towards alignment, is really understanding what are the strengths that are needed to undertake the work that we have, what are the strengths that we have, and how do we line up the people to do that? Because oftentimes there really needs to be a bit of a rearrangement. People are stuck sometimes in tasks that are not necessarily advancing the greater objective from their strength perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doctor, you alluded to this earlier, but I wanted to circle back to Latino mental health and overthinking the need to always please people, because, Doctor, I have a philosophy that you can't rise to the level of expectations of others unless you have a sort of fundamental level of expectation for yourself, my friend. So what are your thoughts on people pleasing and overthinking, and how it's related to mental health in general, but also to the Latino population? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Our work is really focused on the Latino population, because that's our experience, But one of the really gratifying things that we found as we undertake this work is that it turns out that it's a much larger phenomenon, and that we really resonate with a lot of folks that we did not think that were really in our sphere, in our domain. But at least for us, for our perspective, we come from immigrant background. Our parents uprooted from their countries of origin, sometimes under very challenging circumstances. They picked up and they moved, for the sake of their children, starting over from nothing. When we think about how American success over the last few centuries has been portrayed, our parents are the image of that. They're the people who bootstrapped their way into a better life for themselves and for their children, And so as the children of those immigrants, what we see is a kind of responsibility that gets thrown on us to succeed, to achieve a kind of safety that they didn't necessarily have or that they gave up for us. And so there's so many things that come with an immigrant mentality. One of them is, for example, a tremendous work ethic. Like no one will ever outwork us. But at the same time, there's also a tremendous focus on safety, on not losing what you've built. And so what that translates to in reality for many of us is, one, the expectation that your success, whatever it is, has to be shared with the rest of the family. So there's a lot of people pleasing that happens there, right? That because of my win, I need to share that win, share the fruit of that win with others. And the other piece is that because of that push for safety, our parents in particular don't always support our dreams, our aspirations, don't always see our own superpowers as the way to create the success for ourselves. What they would like to see, and any immigrant that you talk to, from, doesn't matter really what country they're from, they will tell you their parents want them to be basically doctors, lawyers, or engineers, right? Because that's what our parents see as the safe route. That's the foundation for success. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, one of those, and that's what you do, right? So when you tell them, and in my case, for example, I remember being in college and telling my parents that I wanted to major in French, and they almost died. They were like, "What does that mean? What are you going to do with that? And that's dumb. That's not safe. That's what kind of job are you going to get?" And all of that, And we ended up finding a middle ground. I ended up, double majoring and whatever. But it's that kind of thing. Everything that you do is scrutinized in terms of how does it contribute to the family? How does it build a kind of safety net for yourself? And so it creates a lot of stress, because what we've seen as we go around the world doing our work is that there are a lot of people out there who are doing jobs that they don't want to be doing, but aren't necessarily aligned with who they are. Not necessarily, when they think about themselves and their legacy, that's not the work that they want to be remembered for. So there are a lot of folks who are fundamentally misaligned, that they have a purpose, they have a vision, but their actions are not necessarily following that purpose and that vision. And that misalignment causes stress. That misalignment is where imposter syndrome comes from. That's where the people pleasing comes from. That's where the anxiety comes from. So the more that we can do to start to bring people into alignment with who they are, and understanding that at least some of their work and some of their time is moving them towards that larger purpose and legacy that they have, the more that we can start to reduce those feelings of anxiety and imposter syndrome and overthinking and people pleasing that really weigh on us.
Yeah, and Doctor, in the few minutes I have left with you this morning, I'm curious to ask you about societal progress as it relates to the American public, but the Latino population in general, and how you define societal progress moving forward in terms of building an inclusive culture. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
That's a tough one. As I mentioned, you're catching me on a hard day to answer some of these questions along these lines without being overly emotional about it. I'm trying to engage my rational PhD in economics kind of brain for it. So what I will tell you, let me put it to you this way, and I'll go about it that way. I've talked a lot about superpower and individual superpower. The way economics talks about it, economists say that what propels you forward is your comparative advantage or your competitive advantage. And so when we talk about superpower, that's one way to think about it, right? It's what do I bring that's unique? What's my comparative advantage relative to those around me? Economics says that the more that you can exercise your comparative advantage, the better off that you are. Okay. Economics also says, though, that everyone and every organization, every country, depending on, you can look at it at different scales, but that comparative advantage or competitive advantage is everywhere, and it's not a zero-sum game. Okay. I think that the fallacy that we're seeing in so much of the way in which American society is going is the assumption of a zero-sum game. So a zero-sum game means that whatever I get is something that I've taken from you, and therefore there's less for you. And the truth is that when we're functioning from a perspective of comparative advantage, the truth is that we can both win by both being allowed to exercise our comparative advantage to the greatest extent possible. The more that you can do what you're good at, and I can do what I'm good at, and bringing those together, we're both better off. Okay, so when we're in a situation where we're seeing, for example, people being systematically excluded, people's opportunities being closed off, we're seeing less. When we talk about reduction in DEI, the E is equality, and that's equality of opportunity, right? That's closing off the avenues for people to exercise their comparative advantage or their superpower. And so by definition, what we're doing is shooting ourselves in the foot. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. I don't even know how. I worry for our country. I worry for our country. One, as an economist, I see that we're going down a path that's going to lead to greater poverty and greater suffering. We've talked about mental health already, and I see that deteriorating. And at the same time, the support systems for mental health deteriorating. And all of it based on a mentality of scarcity, right? That there somehow isn't enough opportunity, that there isn't enough growth available for all of us, for prosperity, for all of us, which is patently untrue. That's been the great exercise in democracy that the United States has been. Imperfect as it's been, we can critique it all day long, but the truth is that the United States has been an exercise in democracy, and democracy has meant that people are able to reap the benefits of that comparative advantage. It's sort of democracy and capitalism together, but people are able to reap the benefits of their superpowers and their comparative advantage. And that's been the growth of the United States over the last couple of centuries. And we're seeing that reversal of opportunity. And there's no way that reversal of opportunity doesn't also diminish those outcomes that we value. And then as we see, we can expand that globally. The United States, it's a globally connected world now. So everything that we do in the United States is going to have ripple effects all around the world. So, as I said, I worry for our country. I worry for our world. I worry most about those who are most vulnerable within our spaces, and that's, to me, the Black, brown, and immigrant communities that already are not on equal footing as many others within the United States and are being systematically targeted.
Yeah. And we can also add people with disabilities to that list as
Absolutely.
well. I'm sure you would agree with that, right?
Absolutely. I've had the opportunity to internationally, as I said, most of my work in this space is in foreign assistance and humanitarian assistance. And we've seen that anything that creates barriers harms all sorts of folks, and so anything that we can do to create openings and pathways, be they physical, be they emotional, educational, economic, is going to benefit everyone.
Doctor, I want to end on a positive note. I know it's been an emotional time for you and a lot of people within your community. But I'm curious, Doctor, what brings you most hope for prosperity in the future? And when you look at your own personal and professional legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
I will tell you that what brings me the most hope in this moment is seeing the community that we've built rally. You know, it's not something that we've always had either in our personal or professional lives, but as we've been sort of taking these hits over the last couple of weeks, we've seen that our community, you know, we do a lot of pro bono work, we do a lot of mentoring and volunteer work, always, and we're seeing that creates real community. Helping others really creates that space where when you need it, the people who are really your champions, the people who are your round table are there for you. And that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. You know, anything that we can do to create those communities, not just for ourselves, but for each other and around the world, I think is where our hope is, because it means that that not only is there words, but there's action that goes behind it. And that for me is tremendous, you know. And, you know, for me, if there's a legacy that I want to leave, it's to be remembered as the person who valued everyone, who created spaces and brought people together. You know?
Yeah, absolutely, doctor. And finally, tell me, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Oh, definitely. So we have a website. We're beactchange.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, yes, on LinkedIn, I'm Dr. Paul Rivera. You can also connect with my wife. She's Esther Zeladon on LinkedIn. And we also have a nice Instagram page, which is b.act.change. You can find us on any of those. As we tell people, you know, there are a lot of people out there who don't have community and don't have a support system and don't have positive voices in their lives. And, you know, if that's what you need, connect with us, and we're more than glad to be your cheerleaders, your champions, and part of your roundtable.
Well, doctor, for someone who spends a lot of time in trying to cultivate inclusive spaces, I really have to tip my cap to you and all the outstanding work that you're doing to promote and cultivate diversity, equity, and inclusion in this challenging time, my friend. I want to thank you for the good work that you do in the space and for engaging in conversation with me this morning. It's most appreciated.
No, it's my honor and my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.